I'm very grateful, very blessed, and delighted to be an American because there's so much liberty still in this great land. Many problems, and I will not deny that we have those problems, but there is still opportunity in America, there is still hope in America, there is still prayer in America, and I continue to pray for America.
As a Native American, the Constitution means to me that I have a protection, I have a wall, I have something that covers me, and that is the rule of law.
I think that the United States Constitution has been very valuable just considering the evidence. Number one, we still have the Constitution, although it's not obeyed all the time, but the Constitution has led to the richest and the most powerful nation on the face of the earth, and the greatest amount of personal liberty that people enjoy. People try to get to the United States. People want to live in the United States. They want to become American citizens. And the reason why is the liberty that we have.
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 1781. Ladies and gentlemen, the first President of the United States, John Hanson. The date was November 5th, 1781, a month after the victory in Yorktown. John Hanson was sworn in as the first president. Hanson was a merchant from Maryland who was the first elected president under the Articles of Confederation, which predated the Constitution by a decade. The term was only for 1 year, and there were 8 such men who served as President of the United States, before George Washington would later become the first president under the Constitution. The Articles of Confederation were the first frame of government created by the Founding Fathers in Philadelphia in 1777 and going into effect in 1781.
When the founders came to Philadelphia in 1787, why did they give up on the Articles of Confederation and move to a new constitution? Well, they realized that they were between a rock and a hard place. They had a Christian people, they had a Christian basic republic, but they didn't have a strong enough national government to allow them to fight off these tyrannies that were coming at them. They were about ready to be attacked by the French, the English, and the Spanish. These great empires were about ready to gobble us up.
One of the flaws of the Articles of Confederation was that in order for something to be passed, all 13 states had to agree.
John Adams had not been far wrong when he said that from the beginning he had seen more difficulty from our attempts to govern ourselves than from all the fleets and armies of Europe. Catherine Drinker Bowen.
On August 29, 1786, near Springfield, Massachusetts, American Army veteran Daniel Shays led a group of a few thousand other veterans who were suffering economically under the fledgling government. They tried to seize the armory at Springfield, but were unsuccessful. Daniel Shays was a farmhand who had participated in the battles of Lexington and Concord and the Battle of Bunker Hill. This attack was known as Shays' Rebellion. The government of the United States was so weak under the Articles of Confederation that it wasn't working.
In America, the government of the Union has gradually dwindled into a state of decay, approaching nearly to annihilation. Alexander Hamilton.
As a response to Shays' Rebellion, delegates from the states met in the summer of 1787 in order to amend the Articles of Confederation. But early on, a Virginia delegate, Edmund Jennings Randolph, proposed that they start all over and create a new document, and that proposal won the day. One state, Rhode Island, never even bothered to send a delegate to the convention. Who were these 55 men that attended what we now call the Constitutional Convention?
When we look to that Constitutional Convention, those 55 delegates, we find that contrary to what is commonly being taught today, the overwhelming majority were actively affiliated with Christian churches.
I actually happen to believe that the founding fathers and their wives, the men and women who founded this great nation, were ordinary people who had the ability to hear from God and to obey.
But it wasn't easy. Loaded down with self-interest and conflicts between large states and small states, and in fights over slavery, it is a wonder that the 5-month convention ever produced anything, and something that has lasted so well for about 250 years. the founders sat down to frame the government, they had a century and a half of self-government experience to draw from, particularly from the Puritan covenants.
The biblical idea of covenant did impact the formation of the government in America. So it goes back to ancient Israel, those first 400 years when they came out of Egypt.
Covenant is actually something initiated by the Old Testament, specifically the Torah, the first 5 books, where you have something unique in history, like so much else in the Bible. This is all innovative. The idea of God making a covenant with the people.
The Constitution was written in Philadelphia, but Connecticut calls itself the Constitution State. That's because the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, written in 1639, was the first complete constitution written on American soil. It was inspired by a sermon based on a text in Deuteronomy. The Connecticut Constitution helped serve as a model for the U.S. Constitution.
And so when the New England pastors were forming their different communities of Hartford and Exeter, New Hampshire, and these different places, they were using this bottom-up form of government, this congregational form of government, not just for their church, but it transitioned to their community government. So we have a direct line where it was the Bible and these pastors that affected the formation of government in New England. And eventually, Connecticut, being the Constitution state, affected our U.S. Constitution, which starts off with "We the people."
By the time you get to the Founding Fathers, by the time you get to the colonies, they had the wonderful miracle of having 150 years during the colonial era to use as an incubator of freedom, separated from the tyrants of Europe, where they could take the Bible that had been just introduced to the world the century before. Only in the 16th century had people read the Bible. And when the founders built this country, they knew that was the foundation. That's why it was so successful.
The idea of limiting the power of government and the idea of the consent of the governed gets back to the practice of the settlers of Plymouth in 1620, that is, the Pilgrims.
They are almost 200 years before the Constitution. Nevertheless, the principles we see in the Constitution of limited powers, limited delegated powers, checks and balances, separation of powers, reserved individual rights, and the like, the Pilgrims and the Puritans would have identified with that completely.
The Mayflower Compact, it was a covenant promise, where a group of people got together and covenanted one to another to form a body politic, where the people were in charge. This was voluntary. You didn't have to belong to Plymouth. It was your choice, unlike England.